when you do these big shows, you really put out everything. I mean, the Access collections, which are incredible. Yeah, incredible works of art.
Patel.
What do you think?
Blanchot.
Any more thoughts?
We're going to have a small audience today. Beginning first of July, it's holiday season. We've got the remaining text, but I've also got a PowerPoint on Jean-Luc Nancy, a general sort of overview. Who'd like to start with the PowerPoint and an overview of Nancy? Who feels they could do with?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Is everyone fine with that? And then we'll go on to the Master Imagination. Was there any afterthoughts about the first bit we read on Master Imagination? So, Jean-Luc Nancy died recently, 2021. He'd had a heart transplant earlier. So he's a sort of tough survivor, really. He's closely associated with works of Derrida, but much more than Derrida. It's associated with a sort of reading of Hegel and Heidegger. And he reads very much like Blanchot, reads them double, both for and against, simultaneously. That's another scene. Who's going to read? Jean-Luc Nancy's writing covers a huge range of concerns and intellectual references. His main ideas, though, are centered upon the notion of sense, the concept of freedom, community, the fragment, the work of art, the image, finite thinking, singularity, and sovereignty. The writer's writing, which is invariably dense, even opaque, we see the influences ranging from Rousseau, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Bataille, Blanchot, Lacan, and Derrida. It is particularly important to understand how Nancy's reading often assumes a dual character, both being within and against or outside the text on equal level. This is especially evident in his relationship to Hegel and Heidegger. These are some of his books. So he's written on drawing. Not all his. I think he's got something like 40, 50 original publications.
It's a philosophical author to notion of finite thinking in the way of thinking of literature,
I can read a bit if you want.
Yeah.
Nancy bases his philosophical outlook on the notion of a finite thinking. It is a way of thinking of an essential finitude of sense outside of the assembled power of signification, recording the movement of thought itself. Can it express exposes thought at its limits as experience. For Nancy, being means making sense and is the sum total of articulations. Following from this being is both rational and differential. All being is being towards something and assumes spacing of this as relation. Sense is born in that space of fracture and takes place or is figured as surprise. Exposure is thus an exposure to the spacing of being. In turn, there is no totality of the body, only its sharing out. Being is sharing of places and the production of spaces. This factor provides the basis of community. Sense in Nancy precedes the separation between intelligible and sensible, and as such is both before and in excess of signification. Sense is without substance, and it is born into the presence. So is the becoming of something. Sense is that something that is always only coming, and once it is presented, then it disappears into the nothingness. Sense is only the sense. Sense is only sense when it comes to its limit.
In a sense, that gives also a relationship to schematism.
Yeah, I read a few books on sense, right? There's a book by Deleuze on sense, and original. I think sense can be tracked back to Frege, right? That's where the logic of sense is coming from in Deleuze's. Because sense was something that Frege claimed that logic was incapable of grasping, and so he tried to invent a new logic or extend logic to capture the idea of sense, and that's why in that sense he's one of the first creators of modern logic. And also Deleuze would argue that, and actually also Frege would argue that the first people to really look at this concept of sense and the logic of sense were the Stoics, who were in opposition to Plato's logic of sense. To Plato, sense would be opposed to what Plato would. So it's anti-Platonic, I think, in that sense. The Hegelian subject is not to be confused with subjectivity as a separable and one-sided agency of synthesizing representation, nor with subjectivity as an inclusive interiority of personality. Each of these can be moments, among others, of the subject, but the subject is nothing of the sort. In a word, the Hegelian subject is in no way the self or to itself. It is to the contrary, and it is essentially what or the one who dissolves all substance.
For Nancy, freedom is not a sense conferred upon existence. Rather, it is a very lack of existence and open to existing itself. Would like to read next.
I can read.
Yes.
So this is the page 4 to 5. The Hegelian subject is not to be confused with subjectivity as a separate and one-sided agency for synthesizing representation, nor with subjectivity as the inclusive interiority of a personality. Each of these can be moments, among others, of the subject, but the subject is nothing of the sort. In a word, the Hegelian subject is in no way the self all to itself. It is to the contrary, and it is essentially what or the one who dissolves all substance.
I just ask a question there. Why the use of dissolves? Jonathan.
Dissolves. The subject in Hegel is to be found at the dissolution of the boundary. So he uses dissolution, dissolve.
Okay.
Equally or interchangeably. So the subject hasn't got any clear, is not bounded.
Yeah.
Which is complete. It's always trembling on its edge or on the edge of dissolution. It's facing death.
Mm-hmm.
What page are you on? What page are you seeing now?
4-5.
Page 4-5.
Because I'm on freedom.
I don't think we're on the same one. We see Jean-Luc Nancy Hegel still.
Yeah.
I think you've gone ahead, Jonathan. We can't see where you've gone ahead to.
We're still on this restlessness of the negative.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't know why this is messed up. I'm just going to go out. Okay. On freedom. What page are you on?
Yeah,
Freedom.
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 We're on stream again. So
Yeah. Do you want me to continue?
continue.
Freedom. For Nancy, freedom is not a sense conferred upon existence. Rather, it is the very fact of existence as open to existing itself. In his book, The Experience of Freedom, Jean-Luc Nancy states that freedom is not a property of which we must demonstrate our possession, nor is it a faculty whose legitimacy we must, in the Kantian sense, deduce. Freedom for Nancy cannot be the object of question, but is rather the putting into question of an affirmation. The experience of freedom or its presentation is not an object of knowing, because freedom does not essentially belong to itself, and therefore cannot be posited as an essence. Freedom and thought can coexist in the sense that freedom lends to thought its leap into existence. Thinking is thus in freedom. Thinking requires this leap because otherwise it is held within its limits, whereas freedom unleashes thought at the very border of its existence because it comes to know itself as thought by touching the experience of freedom and trembling upon its own border along freedom. As much thinking is the freedom or the necessity of essence, foundation, or cause. As such thinking is the freedom for the necessity of essence, foundation, or cause. The other of all thought, which is not the other of thought, nor the thought of the other, but that by which thought thinks, is the burst of freedom.
So freedom isn't something which is given to you, nor is it a constant condition. It's a burst, it's an eruption, which is indeterminate and not constant. So it's invariable. But it's not an object that is given to you as a subject. You're not given freedom. You take possession of freedom. It takes possession of you. And it's not a constant condition.
Is it also a sensation or a sense?
It's close to a sense.
Or is it like breaking away from sense? Is it like when you beyond logic or beyond, like it's like that burst where you go beyond the sensible?
Yeah, it's excessive,
Right.
or it is in excess.
Well, isn't it more like the being of being almost, rather than something separable? I mean, in this leaping, isn't that the same leap that what's the word? Some type of rupture? Is that the same leap as Kierkegaard's leap of freedom? I think it may well be. In fact, I think that's also in Heidegger.
Mm.
And I think Heidegger got it from Kierkegaard, or went back over Kierkegaard. Maybe got it from Christianity, I think. But I mean, that's not separable. I'm not sure it's sense, right? I think it's different from sense. It's almost the essence of being.
Is it like the purest form of being, like you're saying? Like, is it like when you're not at all anymore sort of subject of any kind of outer layers of, subjectivity? Is
What I
like
meant
your
is
purest form.
It certainly overcomes all binaries.
such thinking is the other of all thought, which is not the other of thought, nor the thought of the other, but that which thought thinks. It's the burst of freedom. I mean, it's thought, and thought is that's the essence of being, if you like, right? That's underneath it all. It's
Pure immanence.
yeah. As Heidegger would say, that's something we can't avoid. It's part of the foundation of everything. Maybe foundation's the wrong word. I wouldn't say foundation, but it's kind of essential.
Do you want me to continue?
Yeah.
Kant has begun to recognize that what was at stake in art was not the representation of the truth, but, to put it briefly, the presentation of freedom. Jean-Luc Nancy. Trembling is the act of being affected, a passive acting that merely makes the body vibrate, that unsettles substance. The self trembles at the being touched, awakened, roused. It trembles as much at the feeling of its fragility as in the desire for its freedom. Jean-Luc Nancy, Hegel, The Restless of the Negative. In an essay, Finite History, Jean-Luc Nancy states that our time is no longer the time of history, and therefore, history itself appears to have become a part of history. A time is the time of the suspense or suspension of history. The claim that history is without direction or teleological path means that we can no longer assert that art history is a completed method, but rather is subject to secession that might not be resolved within its own matrix. In another essay, The Vestige of His Art, Nancy poses the idea that all that remains of art is its vestige, an ungraspable fragment, a trace. That in fact, art becomes a process of withdrawal, a passing through from what it once was. So if history is suspended and art is withdrawn, how do we start the process of theorizing contemporary art?
Any questions?
That's great. That's so interesting.
It is. So it is like resolved within its own matrix. What does he mean by that? Might not be resolved within its own matrix.
So its own matrix within art history itself. So art goes outside of its own theorization process, becomes something other.
Okay.
I mean, basically, he says it's not, he's questioning it, this idea of being teleological, which is the way I guess one people have looked at arc history, and looked to the sheet. They look back and cast some logic as if they can explain why everything happened. But he's saying it's subject to scissions, and there's no real linearity of the flow of time. So there's no way of cutting it up, dealing with its temporality.
Would you say that there's therefore freedom, using his idea of freedom, in the history of art itself? It's a kind of freedom, in that there's no history in the conventional sense. It's almost like there's a freedom within the history itself, within art, of art, that is.
I mean, in the sense in which art can only grasp itself by becoming free from its own index.
Yes. Yes, very well.
Which is a trace. Takes the idea of trace from Derrida. It's non-indexical.
Right. Yeah.
For Nancy, art is now both an evanescent trace and an almost ungraspable fragment, and is nothing more than its passage. But if this idea holds that what is the transmutation within the nature of modernity, to continue with this, rather than a refusal of sense or sense of the idea, joined to a will to end, there is a desire, or the will for sense in which signification can appear in relationship to any form, so that all that remains is its metaphysical desire. For Nancy, the idea must go outside of itself in order to be itself. And in withdrawing as an idea, the image likewise withdraws, and the other of the image is the vestige. Art suffers a similar withdrawal along with the image, so that art is its own vestige. This notion of the vestige is a form of passing by, a passing without identification.
Any thoughts?
In the book that we're reading, he talks a lot about this image and this, what's the word use? Sorry, I've lost the word now. Well, I was going to say, I can't see which one. There's two things that I are withdrawing it. He talks about this idea of the sacred. Evanescent. The sacred being untouchable. And he distinguishes the sacred. He distinguishes the sacred as something which is definitely not religious, but in fact, the image is sacred, and it's sacred in the sense that it's separate, withdrawn, unreachable. And it's not. We're not talking here about physical image. We're talking about the pure image, the same image that Ant would refer to. So this separability is very important to him, and that leads to withdrawal, and I think this idea of vestige, remoteness, is important, and that seems to be it for him. Also, where it gathers its truth, and where it gathers its. See the word we were referring to a minute ago. That's the one my strength. Anyway, I think this withdrawal comes from this idea of in the earlier part of the book we were reading. Talks about it a lot. Oh, sorry. The other thing I was going to say, he refers here to desire, which is also very important for him. I think that desire is a force, right? What does the image do? It doesn't. It's not physical. It creates a force. The artist creates force. Desire here being another word for force.
It's
That's
like the conclusion, everything's on the move.
Yeah.
Everything's all in a state of dissolution or withdrawal or becoming. Or passing. It's without index, without identification, without essence, without fixed identification.
Jonathan, in your presentation to the MRES, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was on the self-portrait, and there was an image of a self-portrait that you presented of Antonin Artaud, and there was a quotation there, I think, from his notebooks, which said something like, you know, all my work is the can't remember the scrapings or the flakes of my scraping of the soul, which other men sort of ignore or dispose of, but I sort of collect. And I found that really interesting to think about. And I'm just wondering, well, to me, it seems like there's some sort of similarity between that sort of, maybe there's a difference of value ascribed to it, but a sort of a similarity between those scrapings of the soul that have been a sort of relic and this idea of vestige that Nancy's talking about here, in terms of the sort of the freedom is the moment of kind of creation, and the vestiges, the scrapings that we're left to ponder, but because they're so dislocated from their freedom of creation, they are kind of non-indexical, as you said.
I like that.
It's quite. I find it quite a harrowing. It's. I'm sure it's on the online list of called PPTs on the website. But it's. I found it there's a self-portrait of Artaud which I found quite sort of pain or something. That's how I sort of saw it. Maybe others would see it differently though, but it's really interesting.
He was being administrated electrical shock treatment when he was writing.
Oh.
He was literally fried. His brain was fried and frazzled.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but it resonates with the image.
When he came out, he gave a performance in a cinema, and uttered this wailing sound, and half the people couldn't stand it. They ran out of the theatre. He had this idea of the true voice, cutting through the layers of manner and politeness and good order. Who'd like to read?
You can read.
Good.
This is Jean Nancy Nolly Me Tangere. Don't know what that means.
Do not touch me.
Okay. Painting is always on the threshold. It makes up the threshold between intactness and touching, between the intactness and touching of light and shadow. Side Twombly. The imagination thus presents the image, or rather that there is such a thing as image build. The image here is not the representative image, and it is not the object. It is not the placing in form of something else, but form forming itself for itself without object. Fundamentally, art, according to Kant, represents nothing in either the beautiful or the sublime. The sublime does not escape into a space beyond the limit. It remains at the limit and takes place there. Offering. In the essay, A Sublime Offering, published in A Finite Thinking, Nancy is concerned with developing a rereading of Kant and his ideas about the sublime, and with this, the notion of negative presentation. For Nancy, art itself is deranged in the sublime, but what is central or at stake in the sublime is a suspension of art. A way of understanding this notion is through the idea that art is provoked by something other than art, and thus in a state of suspension trembles on its own edge. Nancy notes that what is at issue with the work of art was not its relation to truth as representation, but rather the presentation of freedom. Nancy also claims that the sublime is rather unaesthetic and is closer to an ethics, and that the sublime, rather than being subordinate to the beautiful, transforms and reconfigures it. The sublime, if figured as an aesthetics of movement, as opposed to an aesthetics of the static, and as such, an escape from limitation, a state in which everything becomes small. Placed at a limit, there is no longer either figure or figuration or form. Instead, we are given over to a pulsation. For Nancy, the sublime does not escape to a space beyond the limit. It remains at the limit and takes place there, and that the sublime offering occurs at the limit of presentation.
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it cuts through a lot of the wooliness of definitions of sublime.
When he says it's closer to an ethics, what can you just enlarge on that a bit?
Well, it does something, and what it does, I mean, it moves you. And in that sense, it's crosses over from aesthetics into ethics.
And so does it move you into action?
Nothing's the same again. Ethics was defined by Levinas as a first philosophy. And I think by that it's the relationship to wonder, being moved. So that primal, I mean, there's sort of looking at the starry abode and it changing your position in relationship to the earth. I think that's an ethical opening, which
Right.
finds a relationship to aesthetics as a consequence. But we're dealing with how limits and boundaries are constituted.
I mean, we also, if we think in terms of Kant and the relationship between, what do we call I mean, how the sublime comes about. I mean, if we think about the second and third books, the second one would be more ethical, and the third book would be more aesthetics. But that, I mean, in terms of the force, the way that the force works, or the power brings about. Are we saying that that there's something that power is more like the force that Kant envisages in the second critique rather than the third, or with nothing to do with them? I mean by that, he's got his moral imperative, and that's how it is that there's some ungraspable force that causes things to the super sensible to be controlled, whereas in his aesthetics and in the third critique, where the sublime creeps in, it's another power beyond the imagination, push when imagination comes to its limit. Who is saying at this point, and Kant is just trying to grapple with how to explain that, or is he suggesting somehow it relates to the way Kant came to the moral imperative, or is this something completely different?
You have to have moral capacity before you can be touched by sublimity. So Caspar David Friedrich painting the this ship is being crushed by the ice.
The sublime is a feeling. It is the emotion of the subject at the limit. Jean-Luc Nancy, The Sublime Offering. A landscape is always a landscape of time, and doubly so. It is a time of year, a season, and a time of day, morning, noon, or evening, as well as a kind of weather, un temps, rain or snow, sun or mist. In the presentation of this time, which unfolds with every image, the present of representation can do nothing other than render infinitely sensible the passing of time, the fleeting instability of what is shown. The ground of the image. The image contains the index of its frozenness, its form, its present, its representation, and at the same time the index of movement, force, appearing, disappearing. For Nancy, the photograph always contains something which is hallucinatory, something that has lost its way or is out of place, and thus represents a flight into a reified zone in the very heart of the familiar. In the ground of the image, Jean-Luc Nancy discusses the deep ambivalence of the image. For Nancy, there is always something that appears outside of the bounded condition of the image because the image exceeds form, breaking the surface of representation in the process. In this respect, the image is excessive, and part of this excessive is monstrous, drawing in some way the fault lines within presence. The image is of the order of the monster, the monstrum, in a prodigious sign which warns, moneo, monstrum, of a divine threat. The German word for the image, Bild, which designates the image in its form or fabrication, comes from a root, bil, that designates a prodigious force or a miraculous sign. It is in this sense that there is a monstrosity of the image. Partly what is signified is the way the images are tearing away in order to reveal the depthless underside of its presentation. For Nancy, this feature is a source of the relationship between the image and violence. In both figures, the excessive signs, whilst also exceeding signs. Titian, Perseus and Andromeda, 1554.
You can see this painting in the Wallace collection.
Jean-Luc Nancy says that the image is always sacred, and in the sense it signifies what is set aside or removed. Nancy terms this quality the distinct, a quality in turn marked by the trait of withdrawal. What distinguishes the image from the thing is the quality of force or energy invested in it. It is not availability for use, and as such is not an outcome of form, but instead gathers itself into itself. As distinct, the image is unbound, approaching across the distance. For Nancy, every image is in some way a portrait, not in that it would reproduce the traits of a person, but in that it pulls and draws. Not only is the image designated as distinct, but Nancy states that the image always comes from the sky, signifying by distinction and distance. The image is separated by its detachment from the ground and the way it is cut out from the ground. This creates edges and in turn the framing of the image. When the seductive lure of images is evoked, it is because of their availability that issues from their being offered. The image is not a matter of beauty, rather it is a matter of a certain tension in the look. An image draws the look, draws it in. This tension of the image is time, and in time I come before what is coming. I come right up to a thing that comes up to itself. I come, in other words, right up to the coming of the thing. What we call an artist's work is nothing other than the organization of this experience. Jean-Luc Nancy, Multiple Arts, page 215. Does someone else want to read? Shall I go on?
Let's read one more. Just read this one and then finish.
Nancy discusses the relationship of images and violence, noting that we have images of violence, but that images are seen to bombard us. The idea of violence is connected with the quality of force that the image exhibits. Violence always makes an image of itself, and the image is what, of itself, presses ahead of itself and authorizes itself. But violence and truth are for Nancy self-showing acts that take place in the image. This leads Nancy to say that the image is of the order of the monster, a warning of divine threat, and this also connects to the German word for the image, built from the root bil, designating a prodigious force or a miraculous sign. In talking of paintings in art galleries, there is an observation that perhaps every image borders on cruelty. If violence is the excess of signs, and the image is likewise such an excess, then art is the transgression of being carried beyond signs, exceeding the sign by refusing to signify anything other than the excess. Gosh, that's interesting.
Who's reading now?
I can have a go. Both violence and truth offer Nancy self-showing acts that take place in the image. This leads Nancy to say that the image is of the order of a monster, a warning of divine threat, and this also connects to the German word for the image, build, from the root bil, designating a prodigious force or a miraculous sign. In talking of painting in art galleries, there is an observation that perhaps every image borders on cruelty. If violence is the excess of signs and the image is likewise such an excess, then art is the transgression of being carried beyond signs, exceeding the sign by refusing this to signify anything other than excess. Violence doesn't want to hear it. It has no interest in knowing. It is not interested in being anything but that ignorance or deliberate blindness, a stubborn will that removes itself from any set of connections connections and is concerned only with its own shattering intrusion.
From a Godard film, History of Cinema.
In his essay, The Vestige of Art, in the Muses, Jean-Luc Nancy asks the question about art being only a vestige, effervescent trace, and an almost ungraspable fragment. Nancy repudiates the idea that we are a civilization of the image and states instead that we are a civilization without image because we are without idea. Following from this, art withdraws along with the image, and this withdrawal of art is the reason that art is manifest as vestige. The vestige signifies a step or a passage that cuts a figure as opposed to creating an image. The vestige then is that of a passerby, because the vestige leaves no trace of identity, occupying instead the very brief lapse of time. What is cruelty to Nancy's notion of art is the matter of strangeness. Art means access to what cannot be anticipated. Art comes into presence on its own limit, and as this limit, which borders on what is still strange, that is to say, unknown, impossible, and negative, to it, and even remains so.
It's a brilliant book, by the way, The Limits of Presentation. We've had that before.
Jonathan just asked, why do you say it's a brilliant book?
It's on Nancy and on the idea of presentation, and it goes further than any other book I've read on the subject.
Right.
The event points to what is to be thought at the heart of becoming, as something both more inaccessible and more decisive than the passage, Übergang, to which one ordinarily reduces it. Surprise of the event, Jean-Luc Nancy. A thought is an event. The opening of modernity is nothing other than the opening of the thought of thought to the event. The event is not an episode, but that there be something. The event points to what it is to be thought at the heart of becoming.
You want to read that again?
Yeah, the event points to what.
No, there's the fall.
So, the whole thing. The thought is an event. The opening of modernity is nothing other than the opening of the thought of the event, the opening of thought to the event. The event is not an episode, but that there be something. The event points to what it is to be thought at the heart of becoming. Now, the event points to what it is to be thought at the heart of becoming. It's the same. Sorry. The dialectic of the subject and the dialectic of the subject has two sides. However, it contains death. It has only as a moment, but it does have that moment, the moment of gaping difference. The subject contains its difference from itself. The birth of presence. Jean-Luc Nancy, The Lady of Sorrow.
Oscillation.
In the chapter Distinct Oscillations, Nancy states that the difference between text and image is flagrant. The text presents signification, the image presents forms. Nancy traces the word image to as designating the effigy of absence, the dead, and more precisely, the ancestors. It images absence. It does not represent this absence. It does not evoke it. It does not symbolize it, even though all this is there too. But essentially, it presents absence. The absent are not there, are not in images, but they are imaged. Their absence is woven in their present, in our presence, into our presence. The empty place of the absent as a place that is not empty, that is the image. Van Gogh once said that death would take us to another star.
The Godard film.
Touch. Touch is nothing other than the touch of sense altogether and of all senses. It is there sensual as such. Touch presents the proper moment of sensible exteriority. It presents it as such and as sensible. In Nancy, being is given to us as sense, but sense is shared, or the capacity of sharing. We do not have sense, but are sense.
That's one of the essential definitions of sense. We do not have sense, but are sense.
Your hands, your lips.
Oh, God.
Bigger.
Are you looking for something?
In his essay, Changing of the World, published in the book Finite Thinking, 2003, Jean-Luc Nancy states, "Yet we are talking about major ruptures that affect everyone, every generation, and all their images, languages, ways of life, from one moment to the next. This opens in us, allowing us to see the vast drift, derive of the world. From one moment to the next, we find ourselves sensible and physically outside ourselves, outside the blind slipping away of our tiny stretches of time. We see the night that borders our time. We touch on some aspect of it, not the future, but the coming of something or someone, the coming of something that is already of us and of the world, but that has come from somewhere else, displaced elsewhere into the unimaginable elsewhere. In the book Finite Thinking, John and Nancy discusses the relationship between destruction and the way in which we might understand how this force might assume indexical relationship to the present culture. Destruction has become a fact of culture or of civilization. It has become not only, as always the case, the action of an action perpetrated, and not only a granted scale operation, systematic in its object and method, the genocide, the camps, the Armenian catastrophe, the Jewish Shoah, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the Stalinist deportation, the shelling, the napalm, the deflagration, the oil fires that characterize modern warfare, the gassing of the Kurds, and so on, a litany that's both undesirable and entirely unnecessary, but also a value or a distorted reflection of value, the index, even of a duty, a task, or a destiny. Perhaps this history is itself in the process of touching upon its limit. At the very least, though, we'd say that destruction has ended up becoming just such an index, if not the index of our culture.
It gives some idea of the scope of his writing.
And reading the book that we were reading, I read it, the other essays in that book. It's a quite broad context of of your presentation. I hadn't read any Nancy before, but that book is quite revealing. It's quite a lot of stuff. This book on the image.
Any questions, thoughts?
I guess one thought I had when, like you say, the broad scope of his writing and the really, profound things that he has to say and the way he takes things into, it just makes a lot of, I don't know, it's kind of a trite thing to say, but he makes a lot of sense and he opens thinking up a lot. And I just thought, gosh, he died so young in terms of his own development. And I wonder what he could have achieved or what he would have given us had he lived for longer.
He had a heart removed. He had a heart transplant.
Yeah, oh God, incredible.
And he lived through that and came back. And he was working right up to his last days.
Yeah.
I met him twice.
Wow. What, at the Royal College?
Once at the Royal College and once at just outside SOAS. But he gave a talk at the Royal College It was with it was for photography, and Dootman was kind of questioning him. The subject was Brecht and politics, and it was I think designed to lead to a sort of empty didactic presentation, a sort of affirmation of Brechtian politics in a way. And he refused the invitation, as it were, but went back. He kept undoing the question, and he was like he never stopped raising questions. So he finished up in ancient culture. And you got the feeling that this was a 2-day seminar, not a morning, not 2 hours, because he just refused not to be creative. He could have wrapped it up and made it very neat, but he refused to do so because he was thinking and trying to work something out which wasn't obvious. It was brilliant. I mean, it was one of the first times I saw someone actually really think through, in original terms, a question which was presented to them without packaging the rather neatly and efficiently a kind of stance. I mean, it amazed Dootman. He thought that he was setting him up just to answer questions willy-nilly, and he kept putting it off and going somewhere else. And his range was stupendous. I mean, really. I mean, not knew a lot. He just, in a very quiet way, he couldn't be held back. It was finished with lunch. But it was really disappointing because it would have been 2 days at least.
Yes.
He could have sustained it.
Yes.
And I, when I met him the second time, I sort of said, "Oh, we're reading your book on Hegel." And he said, "What's that book? What is it?" I explained it. "Oh yeah, that book." I mean, if he'd written so much that he didn't have instant recall on what was translated and what was available.
Yeah.
But his book on Hegel is really interesting. He what's it here? He writes with different thematics. So trembling is 4 pages, manifestation, present, logic, penetration, becoming. But he says, in a way, there's 2 Hegels. There's a Hegel who is on the edge of the contemporary world, and there's a Hegel of almost totalitarianism. And we face a choice of which Hegel to read, a Hegel of becoming or a Hegel of set forms and logic. And he's obviously reading Hegel as a kind of figure of the becoming of Hegel, not the fixed form of Hegel. But it's a wonderful small book. They just takes 3 or 4 pages to define, and then there's a text which he's writing from. So he takes some pages from the phenomenology and as it were, writes around them. Shall we read a little bit of the mass imagination? Or is it enough?
What was the question, Jonathan? Sorry, I had to go out of the room for a second.
Shall we read a little bit of the mass imagination?
Yeah, let's do it.
You're brave.
Why not?
I'm sorry if I'm having to make my mum's dinner at the same time, but I'm listening. Sorry about that.
We can't argue against that, can we? No. The Heideggerian.
Heideggerian image
Who's going to read? Not easy.
Maybe I can do it. I've missed so many classes.
That's very naughty.
Sorry.
It's all right.
So where to
The Heideggerian image.
Okay. The Heideggerian image. In his analysis of the schematism, Heidegger perfectly understands what is at stake here and the necessity of thinking it in order to penetrate the secret of the schematism, reputed by Kant to be unassailable as it well known, which, however, does not exactly amount, it will be noticed, to retching away. This secret, Kant uses this expression to extract its art, also Kant's term. It means rather schematicism. Entering, hold on, what is that? The whole sentence. Can we go back a little? Oh, okay. It means rather entering into the logic of what can be called, for the sake of convenience and in order to provide an image, the self-imaging of the schematism. I would like to examine the operation by which Heidegger attempts to do this, and in particular, the way in which this operation images self-imaging for us, the way in which it exemplifies or provides a model for making an image. I would like to do this by commenting on section 20 of the Kant book entitled Image and Schema. There, Heidegger writes, first of all, image, build, can mean the look and bleak of a determinate being insofar as it is manifest, offenbar, as something at hand, vorhandene. It offers the look. The usual sense of image here, then, is first of all, the aspect offered by something. It should be also be noted that the German Bild has an etymology very different from that of imago, which is the representation of the dead implying rather form, aspect, or overall outward appearance. It is the emblique, the glance or the look presented, directed toward us by the thing. Heidegger continues by saying that this sense can be extended to a build, or copy, the translator says, likeness. In the sense of a portrait of reflection, a photo is commonly referred to as an abode, the copy of a present thing, then or else to nakbud, an imitation, reproduction, or after image of a being no longer present, and to Vorbild, the model for image, the foreimage of a being yet to be created. We find ourselves then before the immediate image aspect, as well as the mimetic triplicity of portrait reconstruction model. Heidegger adds to this the very broad sense of look in general, in which it is not said whether what is rendered visible and Anschaubar, intuitable, is a being or a non-being. Consequently, this is also true for the look of a projection, an ideal configuration. He says that Kant uses all three senses without formally distinguishing them, and he expresses a doubt that these distinctions alone will be able to clarify the schematism. But of course, that is precisely what he set out to do. In fact, he will attempt to show how the production of the possibility of creating a look in general refers back, prior to any kind of mimetic image, to the originary sense of the build as an aspect that makes itself seen. One could also formulate it in this way. He will attempt to show how ever creating a look finds its condition in a primordial putting into the look, and how this putting into the look, that of the schematism, must be envisaged quite literally with regard to its native constitution.
Primordial.
In fact, the elucidation proceeds from here first by discussing the three senses. First, it is said that the ordinary mode of the build is empirical institution, which is always that of a this here, daida, such a this can itself embrace a multiplicity. For example, this particular totally of this landscape. Heidegger thus recalls institution in general as a regime of grasping presence, which is the Kantian definition. A presence that is singular or plural, but always in some way one. Precisely because it is grasped in presence, he explains that by calling it look, species, one speaks of the landscape, as if it were looking at us. Else speak si un san. In Latin, species can have the active or passive sense of look, as can visus or adspectus. Let us keep this feature in mind. Heidegger does not record it, but it will play a decisive role behind the senses. Heidegger then says that every derivative image, every abode, is only an abstrable copy or transcription of what shows itself immediately as built. Thus, it introduced what could be considered a motif or inverted mimetic values. Every copy copies the thing and the thing's showing itself. The abute or the nash or vorbild always shows the build while also showing itself as something that shows itself. A photograph shows itself as a photograph, and it shows the showing itself of the photographed thing. Thus, the copy does not lose the ordinary monstration. It maintains it and restages it in the ground of its own secondary monstration. Heidegger's aim here is clear. The primary sense of the image, the giving itself to be seen and the offering its look, the Außenben, the looking like while showing itself of everything understood at the same time, as if it were looking at us. Außenben, to look, or to sing like, breaks down literally into seeing outward, forms the originary and the proper value of the image, which is preserved in the ground of every reproduction. Consequently, what is present at hand, Vorhanden, can be represented in the sense of copied. But what presents itself does so always in its own showing itself. In a sense, this implies that each thing, before being present at hand in a pure availability, has brought itself to presence at bottom or form. Like a person, much later, in the Zahringen seminar of 1973, Heidegger will say that thing is face to face with what itself, what is itself, and not with a representation. He continues, for example, if I remember and think of René Char in Les Buseux, for example, Les Buseux, for example, I remember and think of René Char in Les Buseux. What is hold on? In the René Char himself, not some image by which I would be immediately referred to him. In 1929, the himself or itself is the same as the image insofar as it shows itself at bottom. Or else, at bottom, the image is an ipse. It is the ipsity of and in the act of showing itself. We will see later which ipse lies at the foundation of the text of Kant-Böhm. This is also true if one reproduces the reproduction, thus producing a Nachbild, picture or photograph of an abute portrait, that of a death mask, for example. As Heidegger says, this photo shows us itself and the mask, and what the mask shows, namely the dead person. As he appears, aussieht, shows himself or showed himself, BZW, Aussach. But an individual corpse itself can also show this. That is, wie das Gesicht ein toten Menschen aussieht. How the face of a dead man looks outward. To transcribe literally and according to the indication given above by Heidegger. This indication states gleich als Blick an, just as if it were looking at us, as if gleich als implied that it is the same as that
and
is faithfully resembles. There is thus here in the ground of the build and a build of the build itself as a showing itself that shows itself as a gaze directed as us. The primary image shows itself as a gaze turned toward us. The image makes an image by resembling a gaze. It is as if Heidegger had said, the primary image is always an image resemblance of an image monstration. There is here at bottom a chiasmus of generative enfolding. The image gives itself to be seen by resembling a seeing. The visible presents itself by seeing. The primary image is always also like a gaze. It is therefore image by being at the same time what opposes itself to the gaze and what opens itself as gaze. And perhaps, in addition, it is sage come on image. In several senses, calm, immobile, impassive, and overcoming all pathos, possessed of an assurance, a knowledge, and a profound art, that of seeing by being seen, that of making activity out of passivity itself.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you.
Any comments?
Image and ideas in the time. Heidegger. Heidegger.
Heidegger.
Image.
Anyone got a question?
An image and image itself.
I just maybe say I just find the intense kind of working out of what's going on in the schematism and what's going in imagination, images. What is an image? What is it to make an image? What is a photograph? It's very, I think it's very thought-provoking in terms of making images.
Before image aspects.
You know, I'm just trying to think, okay, so the next time I do some painting or something, how much of this can be sort of thought about or there in the background somehow.
Sure.
Yeah, it's quite that's quite fascinating.
Triplicity.
There is a, I think it's a lecture on, there's a book by Kant, by Heidegger on Kant, based on, I think, a talk given somewhere in Switzerland. I can't remember where it was now, with an expert on Kant, in which they argue about the meaning of the schematism, and that expert on Kant objects kind of violently to Heidegger diverting Kant and reinterpreting him for his own means, which I think happens actually, which is actually something Heidegger often does. So I read that some time ago, some time now since I've read, but it almost like touches on Kant for only a second, and then it goes off with his own interpretation. I think similar to way Husserl picks up on Kant and goes off with on his own way. I also was interested in this reference to the death mask, because for Kant, for Heidegger, this reference to death is very important. The reference to the finiteness of life and the finiteness of time is very important for Kant, for Heidegger. The human is essentially finite and in its authenticity, always aware of its pending death or its finite mortality. And I think in coming to the work of art is also, this is also in Nancy, this sense of truth or authenticity is only going to be there if it's aware, not ignoring this sense of death or knowledge of death as at the root of the being of being, actually being a being. Just some comments I noticed.
And Jonathan, why it says like the mimetic? It says find ourselves at it's page of, I think it's page on the right hand side, the third paragraph. Why is the 1, 2, 3? It's a page 85, I think. At third paragraph, we found ourselves here. Yeah, why it says it's a mimetic triplicity of portrait reconstruction model. I couldn't really mimetic triplicity of the portrait reconstruction model.
The mimetic is the simulation of things as they're meant to appear. I can't see the section you're referring to.
You know where it says we find ourselves then before the immediate image aspect,
So
as
what
well
is
as
the
the
three things?
mimetic triplicity. So it's
Okay.
it's on the last paragraph on the page. It's on the screen at the beginning of the last paragraph.
Okay.
On the screen.
Scroll down maybe.
I think he's referring to sorry, what's the word? The triplicity.
Triplicity.
Is referring to, first of all, you have the empirical image that's before you. The empirical, and then you have the empirical original item, and then you have the image of the image, and then you have that as a model. And he's saying this thing is a mimetic that's always there. You think that's what you're
So can I understand it's a sort of image of, it's like a physical image and image of object and image in the mind. These three
I think
images.
he's talking, he also says, what's the word? In the very broad sense. I mean, he's talking about
this is really confused.
Look in general. I mean, it's like this statement by, this is not a pipe by Magritte, right? So this is an image of a pipe, but it's not a pipe. So you've got these two aspects of it, and then you've got the model, which is the work of art. I think or the thing. And these three things he's referring to, they're always there. You can't avoid them.
I think it's I find this really confusing as well. So I'm just going to try and think through it and try and get there or try and get somewhere. This real challenge of, if you're trying to think your way through, how you think your way through, you need to build a symbol, an idea, an image of how you create images. And let's take let's take a sort of a simple example. We might have kind of a cognitive model of the way the mind works, where neurons get activations from senses and flash and different kind of combinations.
So it's a process.
But exactly, a schema. But that thing that I've just outlined there is itself a set of words and abstract connections, which is distinct from what's actually what I'm feeling now, what you're feeling now. And so there's this kind of interesting sort of paradox, as I see it, that we are using the image maker to make images of the image maker, while at the same time living that freedom, to use Nancy's word, of making images. So there are these kind of three processes going on simultaneously. And that is the process, if we think of it, of the mind. And so then moving on to the death mask, which is a kind of sort of to say a symbol or a metaphor isn't quite right, but there's also a triplicity there in that the death mask is representing an image of the living person. But that representation of the living person is telling us that the person is dead. But the whole thing is also its own thing, which is becoming in front of us right now, this mask. So the way I sort of understand it is that, yeah, it is. I mean, I maybe this is too simplistic, but I see it as the mask as the metaphor for that sort of compression model of the workings of a living mind. That's how I'm seeing it. Maybe that's too kind of neat.
So can I understand this is sort of like a triplicity of it's kind of it's like a production, artist production is the triplicity of the actual object or actual source, or even you can see the reality if you like.
Are you asking about sort of the intentionality of the creator there? Because I don't know. I don't know how. I'm not sure.
Maybe
it's really difficult, but I'm not sure Nancy here is talking about whether the maker. Well, maybe we can talk about Nancy thinking about Heidegger, like Heidegger's almost making of that image in front of us within the book. I don't know. That is.
Image is we found ourselves then, therefore, as well as the mimetic.
I mean, you've got a passage through different. I mean, if you were a Lacanian, it'd be a passage through the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. And the real is like the death mask, which is non-representation. It's not beyond representation.
So that's the real.
Yeah. It's non-reducible, non-indexical. It's pure elsewhere. Image.
I feel this whole text is very interesting to me as what I experienced this week. So I might bring some example of what I encountered when I was in Berlin and I was attending in a hackathon that is related to the XR, the technology work. And so our group has made a little game that is very, very simple, like only squares, like pop up with each other. And then you create anything inside of it. But we, maybe I can show you a little bit. Do you think it's okay? About what it exactly is.
It's off the screen. Let me show.
Yeah, maybe by the screen. So it's like a 1 minute video. Can you see it? So our project called Quarters.
The project we're working on is named the same name as the team. It's Quarters. We're working on making 3D modeling accessible for everyone. So basically, we want to make an app where you can build anything from very simple blocks. So if you know voxel, it's like 3D pixels. So you take cubes and you snap cubes, and from these different cubes of different colors, you will be able to take a very simple shape, right, into more and more complex structure and unleash your creativity in this virtual space.
Okay, so this is the whole project. And this is what I did when I was absent of the class. And we faced a very interesting topic with one of our judge for the competition. And there is a judge. He used he is in the shape XR, which is more like a software that can mimic a lot of things. And he gave us a suggestion is that we can make something that can be pop up in the XR to, for example, like take a picture and put the picture inside the XR and let people to mimic it. That's what he suggests us to do. But for our project, what we actually want to do is to make an experience of the square to pop with each other and enjoy the moment. And also there are some people say this is really like similar with Lego and Minecraft, which they also use blocks to like play for the users. But our differences is also many differences. So the simplicity of it is our point, and the very fluent experience is our point. So I feel this is really, really like similar with what Heidegger is thinking about. So is it something that looks alike? Is something alike? Or is it something that is for people to mimic? Is a way of learning, or is it creating a tool for people to have open-minded creation is a good thing? And it just fits with what we are talking about here, I think. That's why I shared this project. I don't know if it gives you any thought about it. Oh, and also for one of the jury, he also like suggest us to like maybe to show our works a lot more to the publics, and so that we can have like how to say, many people to like give us chances of things. And I don't know, it also, I feel it also relate to what we are talking about here. Yeah.
It's very interesting, actually. I'm thinking about this.
So what me and another group might think, the suggestion is good. It can be one way to play with the tool that we designed, but it is just one possibility. So it can be a section of the whole game, but we don't want to like limit it to only to mimicking something. So the creation part for people's ability is actually very high. You can use this tool to do anything. Just like how we, there is another like XR, MR reality, mixed reality game is called Pencil, which is very like commonly used now, and it is just a tool for people to learn how to draw. But how to draw, they just give you something that is already being drawn and tell you the steps. Like they give you a gray scale, toned. For example, from drawing an apple, they give you toned sections and let you just like mimic that, and to learn like which section is which section is which. But actually, apple can be drawn in many ways. So I feel that part might be problematic of like a standard way of drawing. But from another sound aspect of people, they like when I say the app has a little bit problematic things of the learning part, and the other said, because we are just normal people, we don't really know how to like create. We're not artists, so this can actually let people to have like meditative feelings. So in case of medicated feelings, I think it actually reached its goal. But if its goal is to like let people know how to draw, I feel it's a different way. I think that is something that implied of why Heidegger think counts three, the triplicity is not enough to explain what is mimic, what is the image creation, blah, blah, blah. Because I feel in the real world, everything has a like mixed understanding of the intention and of the what actually we do.
I think you are going toward the freedom. That's what I think, when you are letting them imagine something and doing accordingly without any kind of, but yeah, the prior subjectivity does come in, but yeah, it's like a chance of going beyond the mimicking, which is interesting. And I like the simplicity of the whole thing, which is brilliant.
Thank you. But it is just like a small project.
Yeah, but to get something simple, I think is the best thing.
And also, I feel there's a loop in it. It's like the machine learning from the human then back to learn from the machine, and then we reflect on all this. No, hold on. The machine learn from the human's idea, and then the human learn from machine's action, and then reflect back to the humans what we for reform the comparison of the human what we are doing and with the what the machine is doing. Very interesting. So also, Jiajia, I would like to know in your project has to be everyone fit in your model, or everyone is able to create their own model?
Of course, create their own model. The only rule is just by the bricks sticking.
So the model is the form will be the break, but we can create our own model.
Yeah.
I think break are okay.
Break is also a limitation, but this is something maybe stylish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It actually limits the style of something. And I think it is also a problem for many 3D softwares. It has like a limitation of a digital look. And that's why there are so many developers now looking for ways to make something that is different. And for example, there are some shading materials like tuning. They can like let your 3D model to be looked like someone paint it. But still, it is a kind of a style. Each of the plugins can be a style, and you choose from that and to create. So there are already many games that is created by the tuning. So they look similar, but what behind it is so different. I feel that is also maybe a part that people will talk about.
It's more about coding, I guess.
Yeah, and talk about like very, very long time, because sometimes we just feel we are being limited, but we are also not.
But the blocks are mimicking the pixels, right? So again, you are like a bigger, again, our screen is nothing but the blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought about pixels, and I was talking about, when you were describing it, I was thinking about photography. And that took me back into the discussion with that Heidegger made around the photograph. I don't know if that resonated with you when you were reading it.
Yeah, resonate a lot. Yeah. And also talking about photographers actually are using same machine to like make photos. They're in a sense is copying the world, but is it ever photographers? They have their own style.
It's transformation.
Yeah. So where is the point that everything becomes something different?
Yeah, and also, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say with the artist.
Yeah, so I feel it's depending on the individual.
And back to what you mentioned about Pixel, actually, Jia was mentioned a bit, because when we are on the tile on this like a Monday session, because we are on the tile, it's like a career, it's like the Pixel. We are actually in the program.
You made me think of life drawing, Houston Road life drawing, with all the dots and dashes and the plumb lines, and the attempt to map out a sort of exact correspondence between vision and the object. We went to see on last week the Ewan Ugler exhibition just around the corner from Christie's, and he spent 6 years doing a single drawing of a model sitting on a chair, and I'll show you the image.
Jonathan, who is that?
Ewan Ugler.
Oh yes, the colorist.
Yeah. Still got a bit tired.
You girl.
Wow. Oh, Yun.
Mm.
I love him.
Spent 6 years doing this painting.
Mm.
But you can see here all the architecture,
Yeah.
the drawing and the control over tone and all the marks which went into building the.
Beautiful.
Mm.
When you're up close to it, do you see pixels or because it looks very smoothed out?
You see lots of lines. He's working underneath how he worked the image. You can see the details of what he did.
Right.
Mm.
It's interesting, is still lives are on the whole one object.
Mm. Oh, it reminds me of another artist, Kerry James Marshall. He's a famous black artist still alive. I think he also used the similar technique that may be influenced by Yun, but you cannot say it's like a copy. It's not at all. They have their own beauty inside of same method.
I mean, the artist he really adored was Piero della Francesca. Early Renaissance.
Mm.
Francesca.
Is the show still on?
Still on.
I'm going to take a look.
It's worth seeing.
I haven't seen it as well. I'm going to see. Maybe we can go in together.
Okay, let's do it.
Tomorrow at 2:00.
Are you going as well?
Tomorrow 2:00.
I'll take 3:00. 2:00. I've got a.
Tomorrow.
Let me have a look.
It's too soon.
Can you make it, Jia?
Do you want to go there again? Can be next week. Are you sure, Jonathan?
No, I can't do tomorrow 2:00, because I have a.
We'll
This is a
arrange anyway.
DTP week. We have a training.
Okay. Yeah, I also have another meeting something.
Arrange another time.
How about
Okay.
next week?
Yeah, next week.
Next week, Tuesday, 3:00.
Or weekend as well. If we
Oh,
can.
yeah. Weekend.
Let me check the date.
Which 5 galleries you have been visited last Tuesday, Jonathan? Is Gagosian and any others I would like to go and see,
Gagosian,
just to
the
catch up
Borman-
the everyone's
Borman.
speed. And Gagosian then
Borman's.
Bowman's. Okay. So it's at the Mayfair, that area.
Mayfair.
Okay, Bowman's.
Check the time. Check the date. It's on Berry Street, Bury. Julia Christie's from St. James's with Sergeant Yates. Anyway, we've reached our time limit.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
I'll post next week. We'll
Thank you.
do PowerPoint. We'll return to the image. We've been saturated with reading.
Okay.
But I think I was just thinking a lot about how to teach schematism, different exercises that you could undertake.
Schematism.
It's a fascinating idea to go from, rather than a life model or a virtual operation or a modeling, or to go from idea of, say, Kant's schematism, difficult though it is, learn a lot about the various relationships to the image and imagination and the concept and to the naming of something, and passage from absence to presence. If you could work out a teaching program around that, it'd be brilliant. It would enlarge vocabulary.
And also just to enhance what you're doing, the process of what you're doing.
It put words to what's intuitive.
Yes.
Maybe we can design an exercise together, or two of us could.
That would be amazing.
Or even this exhibition that's forthcoming, take the schema as an idea.
I think what's interesting in what Heidegger's doing and Husserl did to that schema is they're unraveling it and changing it. They introduced phenomenology into it, which wasn't there originally. They want to. The Kantians will say they hijacked it and turned it into something completely different, which is what's going on. That's why he says it's inadequate. He's going to introduce, the actual phenomenology into that process, which Kant would dispute. I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
They're extending the concept. It's funny, there are a lot of artists, a lot of philosophers who start at this exact point. And this just changes. Deleuze, Heidegger, Husserl, they all take it and distort it into their own thing.
If you read Blanchot's two versions of the imaginary, I'm sure that's, without him ever talking about schematism, I'm sure that's a reading by Kant of the schema. Andrew, do you remember, were you at that reading group when we first discussed schema?
No, but I was in the reading group when we read the Blanchot text. I mean, I can't remember the Kant discussion on schema, so maybe I wasn't there, but I definitely remember the Blanchot.
What do you remember of that?
Out of the image comes out of nothing. That was very profound thought. The image, it's about, I guess it was all about perception. And then death and the image. Cadaver, sorry, yeah, the cadaver. They're both very strong memories in relation to reading that text. And it made me think a lot about photography and the cadaver. As it, where there is nothing comes the image. I can't remember the exact quote, but
it goes back into that state of condition of nothing.
Yes.
Finds its condition only when returning.
Yes. And I guess you can then start to understand that in relation to Kant because of, well, actually, maybe more of what we read today in some ways. But Heidegger's sort of running with it.
Well, that's a good note to finish on. The memory of reading groups and what they do, what they can bring. You take 10 years sometimes to absorb a text. And you say, why is it so difficult, or why is it so elusive? But they're often the texts which stay with you for a long time and become generative.
Yes. I also remember Al Ries talking about Hegel and subject and object. I remember we had a really big discussion because nobody could quite get their head around it. And then suddenly we all got it, that the two are interconnected and work together. And again, that comes into this text that we've been reading today.
Was that a day session on Hegel?
Yes, I think so, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
We did a whole day on Hegel.
Al was into Hegel.
He did the commentary on the phenomenology, and I did the application of Hegel to French thinking.
Yeah. I mean, it's all very new to everyone that was in the group. It was sort of, yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing day.
Mm. Anyway, I'll let you leave.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.